Are the Falcons going to surprise in 2023? Maybe, but that depends if you think winning the NFC South and more than 10 games is a surprise.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or enter promo code LockedOnNFL for a water bottle with your order. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, formerly covered the Falcons at FalcFans.com, RIP. However, you may also know me as the alias Sirius Black, as Mr. Drew. My friends call me Negative Nancy, but you can call me Mr. Drew. But you know how you can become my friend? Well, all you got to do is become an everydayer here of this illustrious podcast by listening to this podcast as your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do that is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you'll get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today's episode, we will be joined by Jeff Schultz of The Athletic to get his thoughts on the Falcons as the 2023 season fast approaches. And so without further ado, let's get into that conversation with Jeff Schultz, who covers Atlanta sports, including the Atlanta Falcons, of The Athletic right now. All right, everyone, welcome back to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast with another illustrious guest. He is none other than Jeff Schultz of The Athletic, covers all of Atlanta sports, including our beloved Atlanta Falcons. And he is with us today, as I often like to have Jeff on these last couple of years, just ahead of the season to sort of set the expectations. And it's always nice to have somebody on the podcast that has a reputation of being more negative than me, so I can be the optimistic one for once. But Jeff, my friend, welcome back to the show.
Thanks. Now, I will have to take exception to that because I haven't spent the last 7 or 8 podcasts ripping the backup offensive lineman. So it's like, you really have an obsession about people who play just part of the time, right? Particularly on the offensive line. I mean, do you want to come clean with that now? Is that
yes? Yeah. Well, I mean, my general philosophy is, in my defense, is that preseason and training camp is really about building your roster and doesn't really tell you anything about the team. And so I tend to obsess about the back end roster spots during the time of the season where I think it is actually applicable. And then we will never talk about these players ever again.
Thank you for making my point.
So, Jeff, let's talk about this Falcons team, the players that do matter. And I recently read your article that you wrote about the Falcons, and it was quoted as David Onyemata saying the Falcons are going to surprise a lot of people, and that seemed to be a common refrain from a lot of folks last year, because I think a lot of people thought the Falcons would be in the running for the number 1 overall pick, and I think they did indeed surprise people, finishing 7-10 and playing meaningful football going into the month of January. But this year, it seems like the expectations are a little bit different, even though they're not the favorite to win the NFC South. It doesn't appear as if as many people are sort of sleeping on them and are buying stock on them as being a legit playoff contender. So I ask, if most people think the Falcons are in the running for the playoffs this year, are they truly going to surprise people?
Yeah. I can't speak for all people. I can say that in Vegas, and they tend to be pretty smart there with certain things. I think the Falcons their over-under opened at 7.5 wins, and it went up to 8.5 wins, where it probably sits now. And I think that's fair. I think they're going to win the NFC South. And given your introduction, as you know, I'm not a Falcon homer or over optimist here. I do think they have flaws, and we could talk about those. But I think the combination of their schedule, the fact that they play in the NFC South, and the fact that I think, assuming Desmond Ridder is not bad, as we define bad, I think they're going to score a fair amount of points, which will make up for maybe some issues on the other side of the ball. Do I think they're one of the elite teams in the NFL? No. Do I think they will go deep into the playoffs? I mean, that's who knows, probably not. But I mean, I do think they're going to win the NFC South. And I think they're going to be fun to watch. I think this actually, I mentioned this to somebody a few weeks ago. This actually reminds me a little bit of the Hawks, when the Hawks started getting really entertaining, but not winning yet. I think that's sort of like that, but I think they're a little more advanced. And maybe overall I'm putting too much faith in Arthur Smith and the offense, but I think they're going to be okay. I mean, right now, if it were up to me, I think they're going to win 9 or 10 games. I think 10 games actually is what I predicted the other day. So I just kind of went win, loss, win, like everybody else did on the schedule. And I haven't gone forward to the division. That's probably the biggest wild card, but I don't think anyone else in the division is very good.
Yeah, I will save my prediction for later in this week because I'm going to do a whole episode breaking that down. But let's just say I'm not too far off on what you just said. And you kind of touched upon, we're going to talk about the defense a little bit later in the episode, but it seems like you tend to think that the offense is going to be the strength of this team as opposed to the defense. Is that a fair assessment of what you just spoke on?
It is. I mean, that's not to say there's not questions about the offense. Obviously, Desmond Ridder is the biggest question. There are questions about the wide receiver depth. I would really like to see this team, and notwithstanding the positionless football, buzz phrase that we've heard, for weeks and weeks and months. But the wide receiver core is pretty thin, really. And I do think everybody's going to catch passes. I think Bijan Robinson's going to catch a lot of passes. Kyle Pitts is going to be moved all over the field. That said, I think they're going to be fine offensively. I like their offensive line. I generally have liked their play calling. There's going to be some questions about Kyle Pitts and staying healthy because he still kind of has to show he was worth that pick. But I would say I have fewer questions about what I think I'm going to get on the offensive side of the ball than the defensive side of the ball. One thing, and I don't know if I'm going to write about this week or not. I might just wait till after the game. But one thing nobody is talking about is that Ryan Nielsen has not called plays as a coordinator, I think, since Central Connecticut State, 2008, 2009. That was a long time ago. He did, from what I understand, call some plays with the Saints last year. But I'm going to assume that those were like short yardage, goal line, first down running situations. He hasn't really been the guy to call defensive snaps since early in his college career. So I think that's a legitimate question. I think while I really like what they've done on the defensive line, there's no great balls out, if I could say balls out on this podcast, edge pass rusher. I think they have depth. They have more depth than they've had in a long time, obviously. I think Grady Jarrett is dropping to his knees thinking about the depth they have inside now. But they don't have a great edge rusher. And I think the question is, are they going to be able to collectively put enough pressure on quarterbacks in whatever these groups and rotations that they come out with? I think that's a legitimate question. And there's linebackers are okay. Secondary's okay. I think there's probably some questions about Jeff Okudah's health right now. I actually expected him to start the year on the injured list. As we're taping this right now, he's not on the injured list. I don't know if that's going to change or not, but maybe he's going to be okay. That's my questions on the defensive side right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned one of those big questions, and that was Desmond Ridder. And we'll talk a little bit more about what your thoughts on Desmond Ridder and how he figures not only in the short term, but into the long-term plans for the Atlanta Falcons. And we'll continue that on today's Locked On Falcons. Now, we here in Atlanta, we love positionless football, and bird dogs might be the equivalent of Bijan Robinson when it comes to clothes, right? Bijan looks good in any formation, and bird dogs are going to make you look good, and they work on any occasion. And you can wear them like I did at the beach earlier this summer when you forgot to pack your swim trunks. You can rock them at the gym. You can wear them to games. You can use them on date night, or you can just wear them when you're lounging around the house doing absolutely nothing. And this incredibly versatile product, all we're talking about are stretch khaki shorts designed to fit slimmer, because Bird Dogs invented a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khakis but stretches to give you that slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Every day is going to look like leg day. And they also use this anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that's going to keep you cool and dry all day long. And to take advantage of this product, all you got to do is go to birddogs.com/lockedonnfl or enter the promo code LockedOnNFL at checkout, and you'll get a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, I promise you. So before we continue today's episode, I want to thank everyone that makes this illustrious podcast their first listen each and every day. And for your second listen, why not check out the Locked On Ultimate NFL Season Preview, a 7-episode extravaganza. We're about midway through as we're recording this on Monday, and you're getting all the insights, analysis, opinions from all 32 Locked On NFL hosts with added insights from the national experts here on the podcast network. It's a can't-miss series before the season kicks off. Catch every episode by checking out Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So I am joined here by Jeff Schultz of The Athletic, and we're talking about the Falcons and expectations going into the season. We've talked a little bit on Desmond Ridder, and you already kind of mentioned how he is one of the bigger question marks on the offensive side of the ball. And when we talk about Desmond Ridder and the Falcons offense, there was a lot of skepticism several months ago, especially at the beginning of the offseason, about the Falcons' decision to roll with Desmond Ridder as their starting quarterback. And for me, at least from my perspective, it feels like there's been a different tone and tenor revolving around the Falcons' decision since the draft. It felt like basically once the Falcons selected Bijan Robinson, suddenly people stopped criticizing the Falcons and were more like invested in like, okay, what is this team up to? Trying to figure out exactly what their plan is. And I wonder, what do you think the Falcons' plan is, particularly at the quarterback position? And do you think it involves the team truly believing that Desmond Ridder is their long-term answer at that quarterback spot?
I think if you backed them against the wall and said, be honest, they would say, we really don't know. I mean, that's what I think that's fair. You can't know for sure if somebody is the guy until he's put in that position. You saw some progress last year in the 4 starts that he had. Certainly the first start to the 4th start was extreme in terms of his progress. I think they're comfortable with the fact that the moment's not going to be too big for him. I think they're comfortable with him in the huddle, in the locker room. I think a lot of other players like him, leadership, all those things. I think all those things are really important. Honestly, I just think it comes down to real tangible things, which is making the throw. I mean, the one knock that followed him a little bit was his accuracy. We saw some of that in training camp. We didn't really see enough of him in preseason to know whether that exists or not. But I think it's really going to be those tangible things. I'll say this. I think Arthur Smith is smart enough on the offensive side of the ball to offensive coordinators have pretty big egos. As a general rule, they have really big egos. And it's like, if something goes wrong, it didn't go wrong because I called the wrong play, because you screwed it up. But that's just the fact. It's like boxing trainers. Like, you'll never talk to a boxing trainer who ever lost a fight, who will ever say the strategy was wrong. They'll always say, my guy lost because he did that. It's not like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have told him to go inside. I think in regards to Arthur Smith, though, he is, despite I'm a really good player, play caller ego side of it, I think he's smart enough and grounded enough to understand what he has and what he doesn't have. And I think what he has is the potential of a really good running game. He has the potential of a very good short passing game, possession passing game, whatever you want to call it. He's got some really versatile players, some guys who can play a bunch of different spots on the field in different situations, and a lot of different player groupings. And I think he is going to maximize all that as much as possible to put Desmond Ridder in somewhat of a protective bubble, which is hard to do when there's only one guy on the field who touches the ball every play other than the center. And that's the quarterback. But I think he's going to do as much as he can, whether it's the running game or very short passes, to sort of protect Desmond Ridder until they know for sure what they have. And then they'll loosen up. If things go well, they'll loosen up as the season goes on, as usually does, and maybe put in some more high risk, stuff. I hope that's not evading the question. The other thing in terms of the decision to not bring somebody else in, let's put the Deshaun Watson thing aside, because I never want to talk about that again. I understood. I'm sure I wrote at the time why they didn't pursue Lamar Jackson. Is he a better quarterback than Desmond Ridder? Obviously, he's proven a lot more. He's one of the best players in the league, and in that sense, he makes the team better. But if you give away the assets and the money that it would take to bring in Lamar Jackson, you could not have done 90% of what you did this offseason. And they needed to do 90% of what they did this offseason to build out this depth. And I have to say that Arthur and Terry Fontenot have really stuck to what they've said at the outset, which is this whole mindset of bring in the great quarterback and have a crappy team around him and watch him get beat up and not play well doesn't work. Now, if you're completely blown away by a college quarterback or a quarterback you could get in free agency, and you think this is our guy for the next 10 years, we can't miss on this guy. We have to take him. I totally get that too. But by and large, they haven't been impressed with the quarterbacks in the drafts the last few years. They just haven't been. And obviously they weren't impressed with Justin Fields, so they would have drafted him. And so I just think that while they may not be sold 100% on Desmond Ridder right now, they were not sold on anybody else to this point. And they felt, I think it was a higher priority to build out the roster, get cap normal, and then go from there. And obviously this is a 1-year tryout, right? I mean, you're not going to commit to Desmond Ridder next season if you're really not sure he's the guy or not, based on what happens this year. So this is an important year for him and for the team.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And, I did not expect you to have the answer to whether Desmond Ridder was a long-term quarterback, because I don't think anybody knows. And
nobody
we've just kind of been
yeah.
waiting, for the actual games to start to find out. But I thought you said something interesting where this season is kind of a referendum. And I think you were kind of touching on this, where the Falcons have kind of put him in a position to succeed with the playmakers that they have on offense and the players that they've added on defense. And is it kind of the idea that if Desmond Ridder struggles this year, then it kind of tells us that he's not the guy. Is there, other than just basically being good enough for this team to reach their goals and making the playoffs, is there anything that he can do definitively this year to show that he absolutely is the guy?
I would say, number one, a high completion percentage. I would say hitting key passes on third down. This is going to be very cliche. I would say winning games in winnable moments. I mean, as much as we can say that, because I almost don't want to get too wrapped up in the statistical stuff, but I do think completion percentage is important. But I think that as much as we talk about putting quarterbacks in safe situations and doing what you can and not screwing it up, I can't remember the last time I saw a football game where the quarterback did not have to make at least one or two throws, whether it was a deep throw or whether it was a short throw, but with the pressure on, or do something to enable his team to win the game. He's going to have to do that. He's going to have to do something, Aaron, to separate himself from, is this guy make us a better team than if we drafted or signed this guy in the offseason? If that makes sense. I mean, they're going to be making that comparison at some point this year as they go through their evaluation of how Desmond Ridder projects in the future. Okay, he's not bad, but on a scale of 1 to 10, he's a 6. Okay, is in simplest forms. Well, if you can go out after the season and get a 7, and you're not changing the rest of the team, I mean, maybe you're adding to it a little bit, then you go get the 7. So I think he has to prove what he is, and that's why it almost doesn't count on just the record or just his statistics. It's going to be, now we've had a full season to evaluate Desmond Ridder. This is what he is. He's a 6, or he's a 7, or he's a 7.5. I don't know if he's going to be an 8, but this is what he is, and we can win with him. Okay. And we can do this with him. We can go deep into the playoffs with him. And, everybody's going to go back to Tennessee and what Arthur Smith did with Ryan Tannehill. Nobody ever thought that of Ryan Tannehill, but he was able to be what they needed him to be. And that was going to be good enough. Okay. I guess that's my long convoluted answer.
Yeah. No, I got you. Now, of course, guys, there's still more to come on today's episode where Jeff and I will be talking further about Desmond Ridder and talk about how Desmond Ridder kind of compares to Jalen Hurts and Stequavius Bennett. Yeah, we'll talk about that in terms of whether or not Ridder can be that sort of definitive answer for the Falcons quarterback position of the future. And we'll get into that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But you guys can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off an NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And now is the best time to join FanDuel, the app that's easy to use, and you can bet on anything from spreads to player props and more. You can bet on the Falcons being 3.5-point favorites over the Carolina Panthers in week 1. You can bet on the Falcons being plus 210 to win the division. You can bet on the over under for their win totals, which is 8.5 wins, or you can bet on Bijan Robinson being plus 300 to win offensive rookie of the year as the favorite. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to kick off the NFL season with an offer that you won't want to miss. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. Part of me, again, maybe getting too far ahead of ourselves asking this question, but part of me wonders a little bit if there's some Jalen Hurts parallels, because we saw Jalen Hurts start 4 games as a rookie. We saw him lead the Eagles to the playoffs in his second season, but they got embarrassed by the Bucs in the postseason. And I think everybody was like, well, we don't think Jalen Hurts is good anymore. And as the Eagles kind of loaded up on draft picks to potentially replace Jalen Hurts, and then he went out and had an MVP caliber season. Got a big contract this offseason. Basically, I guess my question is there a chance that we don't really have that definitive answer and we have to kind of run it back next year to get that more definitive answer by year's end on Desmond Ridder?
I think it comes back to who's available out there, right? It comes back to almost what you do at every position in the offseason. Boy, we'd really like to get better at defensive end. Okay. We have player A at defensive end. Who could we get? Could we get this guy in the draft? Is he better? Could we spend X amount in free agency? Is this guy better? I think it's going to come down to that basic comparison. The other thing, and I never thought I would bring up Stetson Bennett on this podcast, but this is what I'm thinking about now. After Georgia won the second title last year, I think my day after column was about should Stetson Bennett change the way we evaluate quarterbacks? And we've all talked about for a while, it's nothing new, about too many scouts and coaches fall in love with the big arm or the big guy or whatever. But I don't think we had ever seen anything as extreme as maybe in the college or pro level that I can think about it, of a quarterback who just was not expected to be anything. And because they so overlooked some physical attributes, or maybe the backdrop of who he was or how he got there, they completely ignored his strengths. And the players gravitated to him right away, or that he showed those leadership skills, or he made the big throws, and he got significantly better, and he was coachable. And by the way, I'm not saying on this podcast that Stetson Bennett's going to be a great NFL quarterback. So I'm going to put that out there now. Hey, I heard Schultz. He said he's going to be a Pro Bowler. I didn't say that. But in the bigger picture, I do think even if Desmond Ridder turns out to be not 100% accurate all the time, which, by the way, neither was Brett Favre. But they won games in crucial moments. They did things in crucial moments. And that evaluation process after the season, and I know we're looking too far ahead, is going to be, he brings us this, but he doesn't bring us this. Can we do better? And it's hard to know right now what their evaluation of the quarterbacks is going to be. We've seen that their evaluation of quarterbacks is obviously not the same as what many draft nicks are, because they passed on some. They could have either drafted them or they could have moved up to draft some. They didn't. They chose not to do it. They chose to wait until the third round to draft a quarterback. I think he's the only quarterback they've drafted in 3 drafts. Am I right? I don't think they drafted another one. So that tells you something. That tells you that they don't want to strap themselves on the salary cap with a guy unless they're 100% sold on him. And it tells you something. This guy does enough that we think we can turn him into what we need. But the questions will finally be answered to most degree, I think, this year.
Well, I think you brought up an interesting point about, what are your options? And I certainly think it probably played into Jalen Hurts' favor that the offseason, last offseason when the Eagles could have been in a position to upgrade him, it was not a great quarterback draft class. And, basically if you weren't going all in on Russell Wilson, you weren't going to necessarily get that upgraded to quarterback. And we saw how that worked out for Denver. But we'll see. I think you're right that what are the options available next offseason? Is Kyler Murray going to be available? Is, all these is expected to be a good quarterback class. So those are all variables that we don't quite know right now, but we'll certainly see in several months from now, and we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But well, Jeff, I appreciate your insights into this Falcons team and your thoughts on what we should expect to see this upcoming season. Let the listeners know what you got going on over at The Athletic.
Well, just go to The Athletic. I'll be at the opening game. I'll probably have at least one advanced column this week. There's not a good college game this week with Georgia Tech worth going to, so I will not be going to a Georgia game, but I definitely will be at the first NFL game. Isn't
Georgia playing South Carolina this week?
No, they play South Carolina next week.
Oh, okay.
They play Ball State, I think, this week.
Oh, okay.
But
Georgia, you were throwing shade at South Carolina.
No, but Georgia Tech is playing South Carolina State, so you're welcome to go to that one.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
Are you a Gamecock, or are you just?
No, I thought you were just talking trash about South Carolina by saying it's not a good game.
I'll talk trash about them next week, but no, not this for you.
It's like shots fired. That's all I was thinking. It was just like, okay, all right.
I'm shots fired at Ball State.
There you go. All right, that's fair. That's definitely fair. Okay. So, Jeff, I really appreciate you joining me on today's episode and taking shots at Ball State. I know of at least one Falcon fan that is a Ball State alum, so he's not going to enjoy hearing that.
All right.
But really appreciate it. We'll keep in touch. Hopefully we'll get you back on during the season and again after a win so that you get to say positive things about this Falcons team for once.
There you go. Okay. Thanks, Aaron.
So guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons. And I'll let you guys know that I cut out roughly about 6 minutes of today's episode that I'll probably post separately on YouTube. That included Jeff's thoughts on sort of the timeline for the defense to gel under Ryan Nielsen, as well as his thoughts on the rest of the division. And tomorrow's episode, for your first listen, we should have 2 episodes for you. If everything goes according to plan, Scott Bear of AtlantaFalcons.com will join us. And you'll also get my season preview in that second episode where I'll give my own prediction for the Falcons record, as well as maybe some statistical projections, my Super Bowl picks this year, and we'll see whatever else I feel like talking about in that episode. And right now, my plan is to put that episode with Scott up on Tuesday night on YouTube, and then Wednesday morning for your audio feeds. And then I'll probably post both the video and audio of that season preview around lunchtime on Wednesday for those of you, for your afternoon commutes or whenever you want to check that out. And of course, we still have lots of great coverage the rest of the week. We'll have our crossover Thursday with Locked On Panthers host Julian Council later this week, as well as potential other guests as the week unfolds to get you all ready for week 1. Lots of great content coming your way on this illustrious podcast. So continue to make us your first listen. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast for that ultimate 2023 season preview, breaking down all 32 NFL teams and who's going to be the favorites, all that and more. Find it on Locked On NFL. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.